listener production.
Hello, happy Monday and welcome to The Briefing. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. Generative AI can be really fun to play around with, and the tech is becoming so accessible even a technological numpty like me can figure it out. But as we learn more about it, we are also finding out that it's falling into the worst possible hands. So who's responsible, and what, if anything, can the police, the government, or you or I do about it?
Sure as shit the tech companies don't do it. Wherever there's a dollar to be made, they'll do it, right? So it's up to us. We're the users. We're the people that immerse ourselves in this world. And I sincerely believe this.
What you need to know about how AI is being used to make and share child sexual exploitation content is coming up in the second half of this episode. First, though, it is time for the headlines with Chris Spiru on Monday, February 10.
Morning, Sash. Morning, everybody, and happy Monday. You know it's an election year when big money starts being announced for big voting groups. And over the weekend, women were the focus, with the government announcing a more than $500 million package subsidising contraceptive pills and menopause medication. It'll be the first time in decades that new contraceptive pills will be added to the Pharmaceutical Benefit Scheme, the PBS, while also promising higher Medicare payments and bulk billing for IUDs and birth control implants. The Albanese government calculating it could save up to 300,000 Australian women $400 in out-of-pocket expenses. Also on the list is an additional 11 endometriosis and pelvic pain clinics, bringing the national total to 33, which will also now provide specialist support for menopause and perimenopause.
Yeah, now for context, the government has had not one, but two parliamentary inquiries into reproductive health and menopause. So there have been a lot of interested stakeholders waiting for something to actually come from both of those inquiries. And the announcement has been backed by the coalition and key advocates who say women will no longer need to choose between putting food on the table and critical medication. So yes, a big win for women with this $500 million announcement. Also today, Anthony Albanese is promising to lock in the prices of 30 essential grocery products in more than 76 remote stores to match those people would pay in the major cities. This is a really big problem for people in the regions who are forking out so much more for some essentials than people in the city. So according to Choice, groceries cost more than double in remote communities compared to cap city prices. So that is a big move by Albo today.
Sticking with politics, and there have been some big warning signs for both federal Labor and the Greens following two by-elections in Victoria over the weekend. There's been a huge swing against Labor and a victory for the Liberals in a formerly Greens-held seat. While it's on a knife edge, the Lib candidate for the seat of Werribee in Melbourne's west, typically a Labor stronghold, is just ahead of the party's candidate with a 16.7% drop in Labor's primary vote.
Yeah, meantime, the Liberals have won the seat of Paran in the inner city, taking it from the Greens, and it is the first time the seat has changed hands in more than 10 years. It's worth noting Labor did not put a candidate up for that one. So what do the major parties take away from these results? And is it a death knell for Anthony Albanese's party ahead of the federal election? Not necessarily, but a top Labor campaigner who's worked with the party for decades has warned that any of the party's candidates shouldn't be taking their seats for granted when we head to the polls in a couple of months' time, essentially saying, you know, we're seeing these strongholds kind of falling or at least going very close to the wire because Werribee hasn't been called yet. But, you know, it's a worrying result for Labor. Jacinta Allen, the Premier in Victoria, said, you know, we've got more to do. So Albo will be listening to that going, yes, I see that as well. And look, remember, Victoria has long been a stronghold for the left side of politics, and this result will not be welcomed by either Labor or the Greens.
To the UK now, where Sam Kerr's racial harassment trial is expected to wrap up this week with her lawyers to give final arguments. The Matilda star and her partner have taken to the stand as part of the proceedings, telling the court they thought they were being kidnapped and taken hostage by a taxi driver after a night out in 2023. The cab driver says the couple refused to pay cleanup costs and smashed one of his windows as he took them to a South London police station. It was there that the alleged racial abuse took place against a police officer. The jury last week being played body cam footage of the moment it allegedly took place.
Honestly, you gotta
stupid and white.
After Kerr's lawyers gives her closing remarks later tonight, our time, it will be up to the jury to decide whether the 31-year-old did intend to cause the officer harassment, alarm or distress by calling him, quote, stupid and white, and whether those words were racially motivated.
And something else out of this case that happened over the weekend was we actually heard from the Albanese government, which appeared to come out in support of Kerr.
It has been a rocky road for Sam and her partner. The more we find out about that incident, I think the more you can understand why they've acted the way that they have. I think Sam certainly has Australia behind it.
That was Minister for Sport Annika Wells speaking on Sky News yesterday. If found guilty, Kerr could face up to 2 years imprisonment and a fine of nearly $5,000. I think, watching the trial has been really interesting to see what's come out of that. But I guess the next question then, once this all wraps up, depending on the outcome, I suppose, is what will happen to her football career. We heard that there's a jail term attached to this offence that she could be hit with. I mean, probably unlikely, but you never know. We do know that Chelsea's manager has come out, after she pleaded not guilty, Chelsea's manager came out, that's the team she plays for in the Women's Premier League in England, and she said the team's full backing is with Sam. She's still the captain of the Matildas as well, but that's not guaranteed into the future. So there are questions, but it seems like the teams that she plays for have been pretty open in keeping her kind of, the Matilda's not saying, oh, she's not the captain anymore. She's still technically the captain, even though she's facing this, but she's also injured. So hopefully, Sam can come back and take to the field and put all of this behind her one day.
And more than 120 million people are expected to tune in to Super Bowl 59 today, with the Kansas City Chiefs looking to make it a three-peat against the Philadelphia Eagles. It's happening in New Orleans this year at Caesars Superdome, with kickoff at 6:30 p.m. local time, which means the game gets underway at 10:30 this morning Australian Eastern Daylight Time. If you're keen to catch it, 7 and 7 Mate will both be broadcasting it live.
Now, if your eyes have glazed over with the talk of American football, fair, but there's a but. Remember, this is just as much a cultural event.
They not like us. They not like us.
Yep, Kendrick Lamar, fresh off his Grammys wins, will headline the halftime show, and he's becoming the first rapper to take that role on solo. He did take to the Super Bowl stage as part of the 2022 halftime show alongside Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, Eminem and Mary J. Blige. Kendrick's show is due to start around midday Australian Eastern Daylight Time, so it should line up with your lunch break if you're on the East Coast.
And if we still can't win you over with that, how about the ads? This year, the total spend is expected to top $1 billion for the very first time, with nearly an hour of commercial slots sold at an eye-popping rate of around $8 million US each, up from $2.2 million just 2 decades ago. An Aussie boy is also taken to the field for the Eagles. Jordan Mailata will become the first to play in 2 Super Bowls after first running out in 2022, also against the Chiefs.
Yeah, and Donald Trump will become the first sitting US president to attend the game. So there you go. Plenty to keep you occupied. If you're not a fan of the football, that's fine. But there's heaps else on offer during Super Bowl Sunday in the US. Also, one more thing, can't go without talking about Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift.
Oh, of course.
So Travis is obviously playing for the Chiefs. Taylor's going to be there.
Yes.
We know she will be. Now, there had been rumours that she'd perform at halftime, which I laughed at. Absolutely not.
No.
I would hope maybe they'll ask her to do it next year because she's not doing Eras Tour. She's just come off the Eras Tour. Last year, she was in the thick of it. And I think potentially the year before, she was doing it for that long. So it was not her time. Next year, 2026 might be Taylor's time. There were also rumours that Travis would propose to her on the field afterwards if they win, which is so laughable.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think Taylor would ever want to be proposed to in public like that.
I don't know.
No, she wouldn't. She'd do it in front of friends, but she wouldn't want to do it in front of the entire world. And also, Travis wouldn't want to do that to his teammates if they just want to be like, hey, boys, everyone just shush for a second while I, propose to my superstar girlfriend. And also, one other little tidbit I found this morning while we were looking at this is the average ticket price. So if you've ever wanted to go to the Super Bowl, it'll set you back about $9,000 Australian. That's the average ticket price. You can get one for $4,700, which is a bargain.
Pocket money.
I struggle to spend more than $100 on a sports ticket for my favourite sport in Australia.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever spent more than 100 for any sporting event in Australia, if I'm being honest with you.
Yeah. Rugby union's very expensive to watch. Not that expensive though, so maybe I should suck it up. Okay, Chris, thank you so much. Next up, we are going to change pace a little bit, talking about something really serious, and that's generative AI and how it's being used to make child sexual abuse material. Just before we get into today's deep dive, a warning. We'll be discussing child sexual abuse in this episode, and at times it does go into distressing detail. If you'd rather not hear that, no worries. Maybe give this chat a skip and we'll see you next time. We talk a lot about artificial intelligence and the role it has to play in society, but more and more we're seeing the ways we, as everyday people, can use it at work, at home or at school. Generative AI is one of those technologies we're increasingly taking advantage of, but it's also falling into the wrong hands. Australian Federal Police detectives have recently issued a warning about how it's being used to create child sexual abuse material by predators, but also kids themselves. What more do we know about this? And can generative AI be, in turn, used to catch abusers? Akhim Dev is a documentary director and award-winning podcaster who has worked alongside police in this space. His knowledge and experience of the topic is extensive. Dev, thanks so much for joining us on The Briefing today. Look, the AFP has just put out this warning, but the use of generative AI in child sexual abuse material isn't necessarily new, is it?
You know, I think you could even go back one step further to just digital technology. When child sex offenders would have their hands on Photoshop, they could start manipulating images and making their own kind of content using photos of kids from the neighbourhood or even family members. So it kind of like goes back to sort of like almost that stage of the early 2000s. I guess the big changes that we saw is the generative AI aspect of it. And a lot of that was around image tracking in video. So I guess the first kind of AI stuff that was coming out was face swapping technology, face morphing, face swapping technology. And the child sex offender community jumped on to that with both hands. There were members in the boards who are kind of tech savvy who are offering that as a service to kind of like create your own material, whether it's taking a child's face and putting it onto adult pornography or whether it was taking a child's face and putting it onto existing kind of CSAM. In the last 2 years, with the explosion of generative AI, the floodgates are well and truly open.
What does it look like, without obviously going into explicit details, but like what is the actual use of generative AI? Is it purely creating images? Is it managing to create videos as well? What does the material actually portray?
All of the above: still images, video images, stories. You know, when you think about way back in the day before there was any kind of video technology or whatever, people would write their fantasies. So AI is being used to create stories of child sexual abuse as well. Basically, the whole scope. What does it look like? It looks like the child sex abuse material that you'd get in any type of forums. Now, that can range from suggestively posed kids in bathers or, you know, cheerleading outfits, whatever, you know, floats the guy's boat, all the way down to sadistic, horrific rape of infants.
Why has the AFP chosen to issue the warning now, do you think?
I think it's trying to head the crime off at the pass. Law enforcement will always try and get the message out there when they see this type of material out there. They tried to issue warnings about what they call user-generated content, when kids are being coerced or encouraged to produce their own material. So kind of like almost abuse by proxy or remote control abuse. They tried to issue warnings about that. They're just seeing and detecting it in arrests. So a part of that responsibility is to raise awareness. But, you know, I'm sorry to say the horse is well and truly bolted.
Yeah. I guess the next question then is, we've seen how advanced AI has become in such a short amount of time. People who are savvy with AI and AI-generated images or videos are even now struggling to tell the difference between what is a real image and what is an AI-generated image. How are authorities making that determination when they're finding this material?
I've done a lot of work with the guy that they kind of call like the Obi-Wan Kenobi of victim identification, a guy called Paul Griffiths who worked at Task Force Argos. This guy has got a photographic memory. He can remember images going back 20, 30 years of his investigative career. Very, very tech savvy, knows all the tools and tricks of the trade. He can't even tell the difference.
Wow.
So it's a real struggle.
Yeah.
On a technical level, there are ways where you could embed code into the material, but because we want this to be unrestricted, because we want our freedom of speech and because we want our, technological kind of rights, we don't put these little identifiers in there. That's one aspect of why it is so difficult. The other aspect of it is generative AI by its nature will grow and expand depending on how many people use it. The more people that use it, the more it will learn and the more it can adapt and create the stuff that we want to create. So unfortunately, that means it's open source. So anyone who wants to use it can use it. So it's very unrestricted. So for police, the challenge is enormous.
Does this mean if it's AI generated that it's essentially, while obviously still abhorrent, that it's a victimless crime?
I think it's not a victimless crime for a couple of reasons. The first reason is there is clear-cut empirical evidence that people who are that dedicated to making and creating CSAM material, the only thing that separates them from committing crimes in the real world is the opportunity. So I would say that it's not a victimless crime. It's just the criminal is just waiting for the right time to be able to fulfill their desires in the real world. The second reason why I'd say it's a victimless crime is that it's the idea of it that is criminal in its intent. There's kind of two aspects to a crime. There's the intent to commit the crime and the crime itself. So the intent is crystal clear in this aspect. And I think the fact that the material exists in itself and has been manufactured is a criminal offence.
The AFP in its warning has also talked about how this technology is being used as a way for children to bully and harass each other. How concerning is this and what are we actually seeing happen?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing is unfortunately kids who have been in vulnerable situations and maybe exchanged explicit or semi-explicit, nudes, selfies that are a bit compromising. It's that whole kind of revenge porn sort of culture that's growing. Unfortunately, the big gestation area for where that culture grows is in our schools. And I'm talking primary schools, not even high schools. People know that they can embarrass kids. So if all you need is that one image of a child and you can create your own material that is so realistic, kids being kids will use that material to shame or even blackmail other children for more explicit material and even money.
You're still actively working and campaigning in this space, both here in Australia and also overseas. I know you do a lot of work with US authorities. Can you give us a brief overview of where the fight is more broadly against child sexual abuse material right now?
Yeah, I've been working with the United Nations Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning Child Protection Labs, bit of a mouthful. But one of the things that they're doing is they're teaching computers what children are. We have to be able to know what a kid is so we can identify those images. So Monash University in Australia is doing this amazing project where adults can submit their own childhood school photos and hopefully a range of school photos, so growing up from primary school to high school. So we can start doing the biometric planning and telling computers this is what kids look like and this is how they grow and how they develop. So that's a good way artificial intelligence is kind of being used. But on the front lines, sometimes you can beat the bad guy by using their own tricks. So recently I was in the States and I worked with the New Jersey State Police who used fake children to lure predators. And these guys came from all over the world thinking that they were going to meet in a hotel with these 9-year-old girls who are artificially created. And one story was there was a guy that drove 12 hours and got busted at the hotel, like a real kind of, to catch a predator like sting. But he had a girlfriend who was a single mum who had a 9-year-old girl, and he'd already started taking photos and experimented with drugging her as well. So it was only a matter of time before that guy abused his own stepchild. So I think it's inevitable that the police will start using bespoke technology like that to catch predators. But in terms of the victim ID thing, because there are so many unsolved cases, we're talking about millions of children that have not been identified. So hopefully AI will be used in the fight to help that in terms of law enforcement.
Dev, before we let you go, hearing the details of what you talk about is really confronting. And as an ordinary person or someone listening to this might feel like, oh man, this is just such a huge issue. Like, what on earth could I possibly do? Is there anything we as ordinary people can do to help fight the scourge?
I was talking to a guy from Homeland Security, and he had a really great analogy in terms of like how to feel like you're part of the fight. If you believe that children have the right to never be sexually exploited, put your hand up. If you're in a room of 100 people, I'd say 97 out of that 100 would shoot their hands up in the air. The other 3 probably have a sexual interest in children. So drawing that line in the sand and saying that you're on the right side of it is the first aspect. But I also think, as we are all citizens of countries and nations, but we're also citizens of the internet, it's our behaviours, it's our practices that influence how the internet works. If we weren't so addicted to online shopping, there wouldn't be ads on Facebook. So if we weren't so interested in things that are kind of like more on the prurient side of life, there just wouldn't be that content. It's as simple as that. Governments don't regulate this sort of stuff. Global organizations don't regulate it. Sure as shit, the tech companies don't do it. Wherever there's a dollar to be made, they'll do it, right? So it's up to us. We're the users. We're the people that immerse ourselves in this world. And I sincerely believe this. We are not going to make any advancements in this in Parliament. All these issues are going to be tried in the court of public opinion. So that's my takeaway. That's my advice. We have to be more proactive in our attitudes.
I just want to touch on the tech side of it, because we've just seen, obviously, President Trump inaugurated. All these tech bosses were there at his inauguration. And I think there's a lot of conversations happening at the moment about the responsibility of these big tech companies, and the conversation's happening right here in Australia too, where we're fighting to have a safer internet for our children and for young people. What do you expect to see happen in that space, and what is already happening that will either help or hinder people who are sharing, distributing child sexual abuse material?
The sad aspect is that Mark Zuckerberg, one of the most powerful people in the world, has decided, number one, that he is going to get rid of the people that monitor for this content. And here's a true fact. 2 years ago, there were over 90 million reports internally on Facebook of child sexual abuse material either being exchanged or children being groomed. That's 90 million internal reports. So I reckon you'd probably add another 20% on top of that. So Mark's now taking away all the people that look for that material, number one. Number two, he's going to make it end-to-end encrypted. So law enforcement can't see who's dealing this material. And it's kind of like, we're getting into the stage where it's like, okay, we all know that it happens. We all know that it exists. But the tech companies are literally saying, shh, close your eyes. Nothing to see here. I think that's one of the greatest crimes. Also, people are monetizing off it, and children are also selling their own content. So companies like TikTok, they're benefiting from child abuse material being exchanged. They're benefiting from children dancing semi-naked where 200,000 people are watching a 12-year-old dance and tipping her money, and they get a cut from that. They actually get 50% of what that child earns, which is disgraceful. So, yeah, I think, tech companies, they have the control, but we're the consumers. We're the consumers. So it's a tricky one. We all want the social media that is being offered out there, and we feel that we can't do anything about it, but we all collectively have to, and individually as well.
Dev, thank you so much for your time today. It's a heavy chat, but a necessary one. We appreciate you joining us on The Briefing.
Yeah, sorry. I hope I haven't ruined everyone's day.
That was Akhim Dev, or Dev as he prefers to be called, speaking with me there. And if you haven't yet checked out his and listeners' award-winning podcast, Children in the Pictures, it is a great, if heavy, listen. Just search Children in the Pictures wherever you get your podcasts. And if this episode did bring up any issues for you, you can call 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800-737-732 or Lifeline on 13 11 14. Thanks for joining me today on The Briefing. I'm Sacha Barbour Gatt. See you next time.
Listener.